Under a crimson sky, traveler 8UGY, an eccentric globetrotter known for live-streaming his bizarre adventures, set up his camera near the iconic Leaning Tower of Pisa. As the evening light dimmed, a faint hum pierced the air. Suddenly, a triangular UFO descended, hovering unnaturally close to the tower. Its polished surface reflected the tilted monument, casting eerie lights onto the cobblestones. Then, the unthinkable happened. The UFO beamed something down, leaving the stunned crowd gasping in disbelief. 8Guy, a traveler with a penchant for the unexplained, had always been drawn to places with an air of mystery. That evening in Pisa, he was live-streaming his visit to the Leaning Tower, capturing the glowing sunset that painted the iconic monument in hues of gold and orange. As he narrated his usual quirky commentary for his audience of thousands, an unfamiliar hum filled the air. At first, 8Guy assumed it was the sound of construction equipment or perhaps a distant drone, but the hum grew louder, resonating deep within his chest. The crowd around the Leaning Tower fell silent, their conversations abruptly cut off as they too noticed the strange noise. All eyes turned skyward. Above the tower, a triangular object emerged from the clouds. Its surface was smooth and metallic, yet it seemed to shift and ripple as if it weren't entirely solid. Lights of an unearthly shade, pulsing between ultraviolet and an impossible green, rippled across its edges. The UFO hovered motionless, its sheer size dwarfing the Leaning Tower beneath it. 8Guy's chat exploded with comments. "Is this CGI? Someone call NASA. Bro, that's a real alien ship." His camera captured every detail in stunning clarity. He couldn't look away. The object exuded a kind of hypnotic presence, compelling yet terrifying. The hum deepened, now vibrating through the ground itself. Then a beam of light erupted from the bottom of the craft. Unlike any light 8Guy had ever seen, it didn't merely illuminate, it seemed to warp reality, bending the air and distorting the ground where it touched. The beam was directed at a specific spot near the base of the Leaning Tower, leaving a circular scorch mark on the cobblestones. As the light faded, a dark, spherical object remained in its place. The crowd gasped. Phones were raised high, capturing the scene from every angle. But no one dared approach the sphere, no one except 8Guy. His feet moved as if guided by an unseen force. Despite the warnings from his live chat audience, the traveler approached the artifact. It was black, almost liquid-like in texture, yet solid to the touch. The surface was flawless, absorbing the faint light of the sunset. As he reached out, his hand trembled, but he couldn't stop himself. The moment his fingers made contact, the hum ceased. The silence was deafening. The entire area seemed frozen in time. The crowd stared, motionless. Even the birds in the sky halted mid-flight. And then it happened. An explosion of light erupted from the artifact. Symbols and constellations projected into the air, spiraling around 8Guy. He fell to his knees as the alien whispers invaded his mind. The symbols were incomprehensible, yet they felt oddly familiar, as if buried in the recesses of human history. 8Guy clutched his head, overwhelmed by the flood of information. His audience watched in horror as he convulsed on the ground. Yet, within moments, the whispers subsided, and the artifact went still, its projections fading into the twilight. When 8Guy stood, his eyes were glowing faintly, reflecting the same unearthly green as the UFO's lights. The crowd backed away, murmuring in fear. I saw something," 8Guy whispered, his voice trembling but resolute. "They're not here to harm us. They're waiting." Before anyone could process his words, the UFO emitted a final pulse of energy. The triangular craft shot upwards, disappearing into the night sky faster than the eye could follow. The hum was gone, replaced by the collective murmurs and frantic questions of the onlookers. Police and government officials arrived within minutes, sealing off the area around the artifact. Scientists, armed with Geiger counters and advanced scanning equipment, began analyzing the sphere, but it refused to react to anyone else. It remained inert, lifeless, as if it had accomplished its task. 8GUI was taken into custody for questioning, but his followers continued to dissect the event online. His video was shared across every social media platform, sparking debates about extraterrestrial life and the intentions of the visitors. Conspiracy theories flourished, with some claiming the UFO had left behind a message for humanity, while others insisted it was a prelude to an invasion. Locked in a sterile interrogation room, 8GUI replayed the event in his mind. The whispers, the visions, the overwhelming sense of purpose. It was all too much to process. Yet one thing was clear. His life had been irrevocably changed. He was no longer just a traveler seeking adventure. He was now the bearer of a mystery far greater than himself. As the hours passed, scientists reported strange phenomena around the Leaning Tower. Its tilt, once so precisely measured, seemed to shift slightly, defying gravity. Shadows no longer behaved as they should, bending and twisting unnaturally. The artifact, though seemingly inert, exuded a subtle energy that no instrument could measure. And through it all, 8GUI's mind remained tethered to the whispers, the symbols, and the overwhelming sense that this was only the beginning. Whatever had happened that night in Pisa was no accident. The visitors had left something behind, a puzzle, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. And whether he liked it or not, 8GUI was at the center of it all. As 8GUI sat in the sterile government interrogation room, the artifact's weight lingered in his mind. Not physical, but psychological. It was as if the object had imprinted itself on his thoughts. The faint whispers he had experienced earlier still echoed, but now they were muted, buried beneath layers of his subconscious. What troubled him most wasn't the artifact's power, but the overwhelming feeling that he had been chosen by something far beyond human comprehension. The interrogation dragged on. Agents bombarded him with questions. What did you see? Why did it respond to you? Do you understand its purpose? His answers were the same. I don't know. But deep inside, 8GUI suspected he knew more than he could admit, even to himself. The live stream footage, now analyzed by top scientists and military strategists, caused a global frenzy. Experts from every field were poring over the event, trying to decode the symbols projected by the artifact. Some dismissed it as gibberish, but others believed it contained a message, a kind of interstellar blueprint. Yet, despite the scrutiny, the artifact remained silent. To scientists, it was an enigma. To 8GUI, it was alive. After hours of questioning, the agents finally allowed him to leave, though not without a stern warning. You're under constant surveillance, one of them said. If the artifact responds to you again, you report it immediately. Understood? 8GUI nodded, his mind elsewhere. As he stepped into the cool night air, he realized how much the world had already changed. News vans were parked outside, reporters shouting questions as cameras flashed. Shielding his eyes, he pushed through the crowd, his thoughts racing. Pisa had become the center of a global phenomenon, yet this felt like only the beginning. He found a quiet park nearby and pulled out his phone. Notifications flooded his screen, messages from friends, family, and strangers. His followers had skyrocketed overnight, making him a reluctant celebrity. Yet one message stood out. It was from an unknown number. Meet me at the tower. Midnight. Bring no one. The cryptic text sent a chill down his spine. Who could have sent it? Was it a trap? Against better judgment, he decided to go. The whispers in his mind had grown louder, as if encouraging him. At the tower, the area was eerily quiet. The usual crowds were gone, likely kept away by the heavy military presence. 8GUI slipped past the barricades, his heart pounding. The tower loomed above, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. Over here, a voice called. He turned to see a woman step from the shadows. She wore a plain black coat, her face partially hidden by the hood. "You're braver than I expected," she said. "Who are you?" 8-Guy asked. "Someone who knows what you're dealing with," she replied. "The artifact isn't just an alien trinket, it's part of something larger." She introduced herself as Dr. Ilara Voss, an astrophysicist who had spent decades studying extraterrestrial phenomena. According to her, the symbols projected by the artifact weren't random. They were a map. Not a geographical map, but a guide to understanding something called the Nexus. "The Nexus?" 8-Guy repeated, skeptical. "It's a theoretical convergence point," Ilara explained. "A place where dimensions overlap. Every ancient monument on Earth, the pyramids, Stonehenge, even the Leaning Tower, was built to align with it. The artifact is the key to activating it." Her words sent a shiver through 8-Guy. "Why me?" he asked. "Why did it choose me?" Ilara hesitated. "We don't know, but it's clear that whatever intelligence sent it believes you're important. The symbols, it projected them into your mind, didn't it?" He nodded reluctantly. "I saw things. Stars, shapes, voices I couldn't understand." "That's the beginning," Ilara said. "If we're right, the artifact will lead you to the Nexus. But be warned, once you activate it, there's no turning back." Before he could respond, a sharp noise broke the stillness, a rustling from nearby bushes. Ilara grabbed his arm. "We're not alone," she whispered. Figures emerged from the shadows, men in dark suits, faces obscured by night vision goggles. "Stay where you are," one of them barked. Ilara cursed under her breath. "They've been watching us. Run!" 8-Guy didn't need to be told twice. He followed Ilara toward a hidden path, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The men pursued them, voices shouting commands. It felt like a spy thriller, but the stakes were all too real. They reached a narrow alleyway where Ilara stopped to catch her breath. "Listen," she said urgently. "You need to get out of here. Wait for my signal. They can't know what we're planning." "What about you?" he asked. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Just go." Reluctantly, 8-Guy nodded and took off. As he ran, the whispers in his mind grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the artifact was guiding him, leading him away from danger. He didn't stop until he was far from the tower, hidden in Pisa's narrow streets. As the city slept, 8-Guy realized the gravity of his situation. He was no longer just a traveler or a curious bystander. He was entangled in a mystery spanning centuries, possibly millennia. The artifact, the Nexus, the visitors, everything pointed to truths far beyond human understanding. For the first time, he felt both exhilarated and terrified. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The artifact wasn't done with him yet. 8-Guy didn't sleep that night. Hidden in a small room above a nameless cafe in Pisa, he kept replaying everything Ilara had told him. The Nexus, the artifact, the symbols. It all felt surreal, as though he had been thrust into a science fiction novel. Yet the faint whispers in his mind were an unrelenting reminder that it was all too real. Morning brought no answers, only more questions. From the window he could see the streets swarming with soldiers and men in suits. Pisa had turned into a controlled zone overnight. The government had declared a state of precaution, a vague excuse that only fueled conspiracy theories spreading across the internet. Every news channel debated the artifact, the UFO, and the mysterious traveler, 8-Guy himself. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was another message from Ilara. This time it was a set of coordinates. "The next step begins here." He stared at the message, conflicted. The whispers in his mind, those alien murmurs, were growing louder, insistent. He couldn't ignore them. By nightfall, 8-Guy was on a train heading deep into the countryside. He disembarked at a desolate station where only a single figure awaited him. It was Ilara, her expression guarded but resolute. "Glad you came," she said, motioning for him to follow her. They drove in silence to an old monastery atop a hill. Its stone walls were weathered with age, ivy creeping over the cracks like nature's encryption. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of ancient books and candle wax. Ilara led him to a hidden chamber beneath the main hall. The room was dimly lit, its centerpiece a massive table carved with alien symbols identical to those projected by the artifact. "This," Ilara said, gesturing to the table, "is tied to the Nexus. Look familiar?" 8-Guy stepped closer. The symbols glowed faintly, sending a warmth through his fingertips. "It's the same," he muttered. "Exactly," Ilara said. "This table is part of a global network, ancient sites designed to mark the Nexus." As if on cue, the whispers in his mind surged. Images flashed before his eyes, starfields, shifting dimensions, and a vast, pulsing energy source. He staggered back, clutching his head. "What's happening to me?" he gasped. Ilara steadied him. "The artifact's connection to you is growing stronger. You're acting as a conduit. Whatever intelligence is behind this, it's trying to guide you." Before he could respond, the ground trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling as the room vibrated. "They found us," Ilara said grimly. "There's a group, private, not government, trying to control this technology." The trembling intensified, followed by boots echoing above. Ilara grabbed his arm. "We have to move. Now!" She led him through a hidden passage winding deep into the hillside. The whispers in 8-Gui's head were almost deafening, urging him forward. They emerged into a forest, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the tension underground. "This way," Ilara urged, but before they could move, a blinding light illuminated the trees. A helicopter hovered overhead, its spotlight locking onto them. "Run!" Ilara shouted. They sprinted through the woods, branches clawing at their clothes. The helicopter's rotors roared and men closed in on foot. 8-Guy's chest burned, but the whispers pushed him onward, almost as if guiding his movements. Suddenly, the ground gave way. They tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard in a stream. Pain shot through 8-Guy's leg, but Ilara pulled him up. "Keep moving," she hissed. They stumbled into a clearing. A massive stone structure rose from the earth, its surface carved with alien symbols. The structure pulsed faintly, as though alive. "This is it," Ilara whispered, trembling. "One of the Nexus gates." The whispers in 8-Guy's mind reached a crescendo. Without thinking, he approached the structure, his hand outstretched. The symbols glowed brighter, responding to his touch. A low hum filled the air, and the gate began to shift, its stone panels forming an archway. Behind them, their pursuers grew louder. Ilara turned to 8-Guy. "You have to activate it. It's the only way." "But what happens if I do?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but if they catch us, it's over." With no choice, 8-Guy pressed his palm against the center of the archway. The glow intensified, enveloping them in blinding light. The air around them seemed to fold in on itself, and for a brief moment he felt weightless. The symbols, now humming in unison, projected streams of light into the forest. It was as though the gate was drawing power from everything around it. Ilara's voice cut through the surreal moment. "Hold on. Whatever happens, don't let go." The archway pulsed, emitting a sound that resonated deep within 8-Guy's chest. He felt the world shift, gravity twisting, space folding. The forest rippled, the trees bending like liquid. For a moment, everything froze. The blinding light softened into a swirling vortex, and 8-Guy felt as though he was standing on the edge of a vast, cosmic chasm. Ilara's grip on his arm tightened. This is it. This is what the artifact wanted. As the vortex grew brighter, the sounds of their pursuers faded entirely. The helicopter's roar, the shouts, all of it was swallowed by the light. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the world around them vanished, and there was nothing but light. The light faded, and ATU found himself standing in an expanse that defied logic. The ground beneath him shimmered like glass, reflecting the star-filled sky above, though no stars were recognizable. Strange geometric shapes floated in the air, rippling as though alive. The air buzzed faintly, charged with energy he could feel vibrating through his chest. Ilara stood beside him, equally mesmerized. "We've crossed over," she whispered. "This must be the Nexus." 8-Guy's mind raced to comprehend what he was seeing. The whispers that had tormented him for days now felt clearer, almost guiding his thoughts. "I think it's alive," he said hesitantly. Before Ilar could respond, a sound reverberated through the space, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The floating shapes began to shift, aligning themselves into patterns. Streams of light connected them, forming what looked like a massive three-dimensional map. Ilara stepped closer, her eyes wide. "It's a star chart," she said, "but it's not from our galaxy. These constellations, they're completely alien." The whispers surged again in 8UI's mind, clearer now than ever before. He felt compelled to step forward, drawn to the map as if by an invisible force. As he approached, the lights shifted, focusing on a single point within the map, a glowing sphere suspended in the center. "Be careful," Ilara warned, but her voice sounded distant, muffled by the intensity of the moment. 8-Guy reached out, his fingers brushing the glowing sphere. Instantly his mind was flooded with visions. He saw planets teeming with life, civilizations rising and falling, and vast cosmic structures beyond anything humans could imagine. Among these visions was a recurring image, the Nexus itself, positioned at the center of an intricate web connecting countless worlds. He stumbled back, gasping. "It's a gateway," he said, his voice shaky. "The Nexus. It links to other dimensions, other worlds. It's a bridge." Ilara's face darkened with realization. If that's true, then the artifact, it wasn't just a key, it was an invitation. Someone, or something, wanted us to find this. Before they could process the implications, the hum grew louder. The floating shapes began to shift again, this time forming a ring around the two of them. Ilara's gaze darted around, her expression turning to concern. "Something's happening." A beam of light shot down from above, striking the glowing map. From the beam emerged a figure, tall, translucent, and humanoid, yet unmistakably alien. Its form shimmered, as if composed of pure light and energy. 8-Gui and Ilara froze, unsure whether to run or stay. The being raised an arm, and instantly the whispers in 8-Gui's mind stopped. Instead, a single voice echoed in his thoughts, clear and commanding. "Traveler," the voice said, addressing him directly, "you have activated the Nexus. Your world stands on the precipice of transformation." Ilara tried to speak, but no sound escaped her lips. It was as though the being's presence had silenced everything except the connection it shared with 8-Gui. "Why me?" 8-Gui asked, his voice shaking. "Why was I chosen?" The being's gaze, or what passed for a gaze, seemed to pierce through him. "Your kind has reached a threshold," it said. "The Nexus responds to those who seek it with intent. You were the catalyst." Ilara managed to break free of the silence, her voice desperate. "What does this mean for our world? What's going to happen?" The being turned to her, its form flickering slightly. "The Nexus offers many paths, unity or division, creation or destruction. The choice is not ours to make." Before 8-Gui could ask what that meant, the being extended its hand toward him. A small sphere of light detached from its body, floating toward 8-Gui. Instinctively, he reached out, and the moment he touched it, a surge of energy coursed through him. Images and knowledge flooded his mind, maps, languages, technologies far beyond human comprehension. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed. Alara rushed to his side, her expression filled with concern. Guy, are you okay? I think it gave me something, he said, his voice trembling. Information. Instructions. The being stepped back, its form beginning to dissolve into the light. The nexus has been opened. The path is yours to choose. With that, it vanished, leaving 8Gui and Alara alone in the surreal expanse. Alara helped him to his feet. What did it mean by the path is ours to choose, and what did it give you? 8Guy closed his eyes, trying to piece together the fragments of knowledge now imprinted in his mind. It's a guide, he said slowly, a way to use the nexus, but it's not just for us, it's for everyone. The ground beneath them began to vibrate, and the glowing map flickered. The space around them seemed to shift, as though the nexus itself was responding to their presence. Alara grabbed 8Guy's arm. We need to go. Whatever this place is, it's unstable. As they turned to leave, a doorway of light appeared in front of them, similar to the one they had entered through. 8Gu hesitated, glancing back at the map one last time. The whispers in his mind had returned, softer now, but still present. This isn't over, he said quietly. Together, they stepped through the doorway, leaving the nexus behind. The transition was instantaneous. They found themselves back in the clearing, the stone structure now dormant. The night was silent, the forest still. Alara looked at him. What now? 8Guy took a deep breath, the weight of the knowledge he carried pressing heavily on him. Now, we decide what to do with it. The air in the clearing was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. 8Guy and Alara stood motionless, grappling with what they had just experienced. The nexus, the being, the knowledge, it was overwhelming. The responsibility of what to do next loomed over them. We can't stay here, Alara said finally, breaking the silence. If those people are still after us, they'll be back. 8Guy nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. The images and information the being had imprinted on him played on an endless loop in his thoughts. They're going to keep hunting us, he said quietly. They won't stop until they get what they want. Alara frowned. We need a plan. That knowledge in your head, it's bigger than any of us. If it falls into the wrong hands... She didn't finish, but the weight of her words hung in the air. They moved quickly, heading back toward the city under the cover of darkness. Every sound in the forest felt amplified, every shadow a potential threat. By the time they reached the outskirts of Pisa, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in muted shades of orange. Soldiers still patrolled the streets, their expressions cold and calculating. Alara led them to a nondescript apartment building. It's safe, she said, unlocking the door to a small, sparsely furnished room. At least for now. 8Guy collapsed onto a worn couch, his mind still spinning. What did the being mean? He asked. The Nexus offers many paths? Unity, division, creation, destruction? It sounded like a test. Alara sat across from him, her face thoughtful. Maybe it is. The Nexus is a tool, one that could reshape everything we know. But tools are neutral. It's how we use them that defines the outcome. 8Guy shook his head. I don't even know where to start. The information it gave me, it's like trying to read a book in a language I don't understand. Alara leaned forward. Then we take it one step at a time. Start with what you do know. What did the visions show you? He closed his eyes, letting the fragments of the knowledge surface. There were maps, not just of space, but of dimensions, pathways connecting worlds, realities, and there was something else, a kind of energy source. The Nexus feeds on it, but it also creates it. It's like a cycle. Alara's eyes widened. If that's true, then the Nexus isn't just a bridge, it's a power source, and if someone learns to control it... Eitgi opened his eyes, his expression grim. They could control everything. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of traffic outside. Eitgi leaned back, his mind racing. The knowledge wasn't just a burden, it was a target on his back. Elara stood suddenly, pacing. "We need help," she said. "This is bigger than the two of us. There are people, scientists, researchers, who could help us decode what's in your head. We can't do this alone." Eitgi hesitated. "How do we know who to trust? If we choose the wrong people—" "I know some people," Elara said firmly. "People I've worked with before. If anyone can help us, it's them." Reluctantly, Eitgi nodded. "Okay, but we have to be careful." "They won't find us," Elara assured him. "We'll move quietly, stay off the grid." Using burner phones and encrypted messages, Elara reached out to her contacts, arranging a meeting in a remote location. Eitgi stayed in the apartment, poring over the fragments of knowledge in his mind, trying to piece them together into something coherent. The days passed in a blur. Every noise outside felt like a threat. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. They traveled by bus and train, avoiding major cities, until they reached a secluded cabin deep in the mountains. The scientists were waiting, a small group of men and women with sharp eyes and an air of quiet intensity. They listened intently as Elara and Eitgi recounted everything: the UFO, the artifact, the nexus, the being. When Eitgi described the knowledge imprinted on him, the scientists exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of awe and concern. "This changes everything," one of them said finally. "If what you're saying is true, then the nexus could unlock the greatest mysteries of existence. But it's also a weapon, one more powerful than anything we've ever imagined." Another scientist turned to Eitgi. "You're the key to all of this. The knowledge in your head, it's the only thing standing between humanity and whatever forces might try to exploit this." The weight of their words pressed heavily on Eitgi. He hadn't asked for this responsibility, but now it was his reality. The choice he made would shape the future, not just for himself, but for the world. The conversation stretched late into the night, plans forming and evolving with every passing hour. They discussed ways to safeguard the knowledge, to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. But as dawn broke, one thing became clear. There were no easy answers. As Eitgi stared out at the sunrise, his mind drifted back to the being's words. "The path is yours to choose." The choice wasn't just his, it was humanity's. The nexus was a tool, a test, and a challenge. How it was used would determine the fate of everything. One thing was certain: the journey was far from over. The cabin was silent, save for the rustle of papers and occasional scribbles as the scientists pored over their notes. Eitgi sat in a corner, his head buried in his hands. The weight of the nexus, its warnings, and the responsibility it carried felt unbearable. Elara stood by the window, scanning the forest edge. Every sound, every flicker of movement, sent a fresh wave of paranoia through her. "We don't have time," Elara said, breaking the tense quiet. "The more we wait, the more unstable it becomes." Dr. Orson, hunched over a hastily drawn diagram, looked up. "And what exactly do you propose? This knowledge, whatever's in his head, is beyond our comprehension. If we act without understanding it, we could destroy everything even faster." Eitgi lifted his head. "It's not just a risk anymore. The whispers—" He paused, closing his eyes, trying to focus. "The nexus is unraveling. If it collapses, it'll take everything connected to it, not just our world, but all of them." Elara frowned. "Then why are we still here talking about it? We need to act." Dr. Hala gestured to the notes scattered across the table. "Act on what? We're trying to piece together a puzzle with no edges, no image to guide us. What if we make things worse?" Before anyone could respond, a tremor rippled through the cabin, faint at first but quickly growing stronger. Equipment rattled, a few glasses tipped over, and a low hum filled the air. "It's starting," 8-Guy muttered, his voice trembling. "We're out of time." The faint sound of helicopter blades reached their ears, growing louder with each passing second. The scientists exchanged alarmed glances. Alara moved to the door, peeking through the gap. "They found us," she said. "We need to move." The cabin burst into motion as everyone scrambled to pack up their work. Laptops, sketches, and notes were shoved into bags with frantic urgency. Amid the chaos, 8-Guy froze, his eyes unfocused. The whispers in his mind shifted, no longer fragmented but clear, cohesive. A vivid image burned into his thoughts. A location. "I know where we need to go," he said abruptly. Alara turned, her brow furrowed. "Where?" "It's the anchor," he explained, his voice firm. "The Nexus isn't just a bridge, it's tethered to something in our world. If we can stabilize the anchor, we can stabilize the Nexus." Dr. Hala looked skeptical. "And if you're wrong?" 8-Guy stood, his jaw set. "I'm not. This is the only way." With no other options, the group piled into 2 unmarked SUVs and sped into the forest. The helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights slicing through the trees. Every second felt like borrowed time. Hours later, they arrived at a barren plateau deep in the mountains. The air was thin, and the landscape was desolate. But 8-Guy felt an unshakable certainty. "This is it," he said, stepping out of the vehicle. The scientists quickly set up their equipment, scanning the area. It didn't take long to find it. A faint, pulsing energy field, invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable on their instruments. "This is the anchor," Dr. Orson said, his voice trembling with awe. "But the energy readings, they're off the charts. It's wildly unstable." 8-Guy knelt, placing his hand on the ground. The hum of the energy beneath him vibrated through his body, almost deafening. The whispers in his mind grew sharper, guiding him. "I can stabilize it," he said, his voice steady. "But I'll need help. There's a sequence, symbols, patterns. I can see them, but I don't know how to execute them." The scientists worked quickly, following 8-Guy's directions to construct a makeshift stabilizing array. The energy field grew more volatile with every passing second, the hum rising to an unbearable pitch. Suddenly, the helicopters descended, their rotors whipping the air into chaos. Men in tactical gear emerged, their weapons drawn. "Step away from the site," one of them barked. Alara stepped forward, her hands raised. "If you interfere now, you'll kill us all. We're trying to stop it from collapsing." The leader hesitated, his weapon still trained on her. The ground began to quake violently, and the energy field pulsed erratically, sending waves of light and heat through the air. 8-Guy ignored the commotion, his focus entirely on the symbols in his mind. Slowly, they aligned, forming a clear sequence. "I've got it," he shouted. "Just a few more seconds." Alara turned back to the armed men. "If you stop him, you're condemning everyone. Stand down." Reluctantly, the leader signaled his men to hold fire, but their weapons remained raised. Meanwhile, 8-U guided the scientists through the final steps. The energy field roared, its chaotic pulses intensifying, until, suddenly, it began to stabilize. The hum softened, the trembling ground stilled, and the blinding light dimmed. "It's done," 8-Guy said, collapsing to his knees. The armed men lowered their weapons, their expressions a mix of confusion and relief. Alara rushed to 8-Guy's side, her voice soft but firm. "You did it." 8-Guy shook his head. "It's only temporary. The Nexus is still connected to everything. If we don't find a way to protect it, this will happen again." Dr. Orson stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Then we protect it. We find a way to ensure it never falls into the wrong hands." As they descended the mountain, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the barren landscape in golden light. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their choices would shape not just their world, but every world connected to the Nexus.